Hello, welcome to the show. My name is Alex and this is TechFlow. More specifically, welcome to my 1 month later review / day in the life of the iPhone 13 Pro Max. Now, I use my phones pretty normally, like I would assume a normal person to, so I hope this will represent and cover most of the things that you want to know about this device. First off, I just want to say, I'm surrounded by technology all the time, right? There's not much that comes along that blows me away, but this phone, it's better than you think, and in certain areas, this thing has definitely blown me away. Welcome to my iPhone 13 review.
Absolutely blowing my mind. 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 Absolutely.
Now, Apple have focused on three main areas with this phone. Those areas are the battery life, the camera system, and the screen, respectively. However, I want this video to touch on a little bit more than that, which is why I've got this day in the life element to it. So let's start this review where I would start my day, getting out of bed. Now, I'm gonna get my complaints right out the way to start with. If you are somebody that wants to fast charge your phone, and albeit that is a very specific area of a phone, then the iPhone lineup, especially the 13 Pro Max, isn't for you because this thing doesn't fast charge. This is my first time in my life using MagSafe, and if you don't know what MagSafe is, it's basically this new thing that Apple has invented that you have to buy to be able to charge your phone, and it's a puck that magnetically sticks to the back of your phone and charges it way slower than the cable. If you want some specifics here, the MagSafe wireless charging is around 15 watts, whereas plugging in with a cable gives you 27. Even 27 in today's standards isn't very fast. I would always recommend that you use a cable over MagSafe. Now, usually the first thing I do with my day is I get up, I travel downstairs, I stick on the coffee, I make myself some breakfast, and I listen to some music. I've found just in my life personally that listening to music when I wake up in the morning really just gets me in the mood for the day. It's something that I've done religiously and couldn't really live without now. I'd usually in my kitchen play my music that I'm listening to through my KEF LS50 wireless. Now, over the last month, I've found myself more often than not listening to music from the iPhone 13's speakers, built-in speakers, whilst it's just been sat on my countertop whilst I've been making my coffee. The speakers in this phone just sound really, really good, and obviously Apple have made this phone a lot bigger than the previous phones, like physically bigger, and we'll touch on that later in a second. But what I think that's allowed them to do, as far as the audio is concerned, is fit some bigger drivers in here, which can in turn move more air, which can in turn sound like bigger speakers.
I was trying to save us, but you got me looking like a villain.
Good enough for me to listen to music in the morning out of them whilst I'm making my coffee. Now, the next thing I usually do with my day is catch up on my social media. So that's Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, Snapchat, yada yada yada. I'll sit here and just scroll through all of my messages. And that moves us swiftly onto the screen. Loads of upgrades here with this 13 Pro Max. It's super, super bright. It goes all the way up to 1200 nits if you're watching HDR content, or 1000 nits normally, what I found in my day-to-day usage. Wouldn't be an iPhone 13 video without mentioning the notch. Yes, it is a little bit smaller, 20% to be exact. The one thing I would say is don't buy this phone over the smaller notch. It's not a reason to go out and buy this phone whatsoever. It doesn't give you any extra benefits, and the screen real estate compared to the previous phones isn't even used. You've still got the exact same things at the top of the screen: status, battery, signal. The screen on this phone is more color accurate than the majority of screens that professionals are doing their photo editing or video editing work on. For example, my two PC screens upstairs, I think this phone would outdo them in the color accuracy department, hands down. Obviously, that's topped off with the fact that this is a LTPO screen. Alex, what does that mean? Basically means it has a variable refresh rate. It can go all the way from 1 Hz all the way up to 120, yes, finally we have an iPhone with 120 Hz. I've been used to this for the past 2 years with my iPad Pro, which has had the ProMotion screen on it, and honestly, it makes the devices feel like they belong in the 21st century, which they do, especially at this price point. I really like the LTPO as well because, and we're going to touch on this a little bit later, the battery life in this phone is literally the best feature of it, and it's because of this variable refresh rate that they are able to achieve such a great battery life. So after breakfast and a coffee, it's time to tie up a few loose ends with a few phone calls. Not really anything to report here. The call quality is absolutely fine, as it has been with previous iPhones. It's loud enough on the earpiece speaker. The speakers, as I've already mentioned, are great, so if you're doing conference calls with this thing, you can stick it on your table. Everybody can hear everybody, and the noise cancelling on this phone is great. Apple have done a lot of learning from their AirPods noise cancelling, and I'm sure they're putting that tech in here too. Okay, so I'm currently on the phone, right, and you are hearing the other end of this phone call. I'm going to turn this Hoover on. And now
audio of the phone call. Hopefully it's completely cancelled out.
That Hoover, and all you can hear
is my voice.
Now back to this camera.
Crazy, right?
The only other thing to report whilst having my phone calls is that this phone is absolutely massive. Now, when I first picked this phone up out of the box, coming from my previous phone, like I said, the 11 Pro Max, you can physically see and feel the difference here. This is a big phone compared to these thin ones that we've had of the past. Now, yes, obviously, if you stick a case on this phone, it gets even thicker, which is kind of crazy, but dare I say it, this phone feels like a pro device. Obviously, it's the iPhone 13 Pro Max. This does feel pro in the hand, and it is because of that. It's because it's a little bit heavier, it's a little bit bigger. It doesn't feel like it's gonna snap under any pressure. It feels heavy, it feels like it's got some chunk to it. It feels like a device to get the job done, and that is the type of phone that I wanna be pulling out my pocket every day. Battery life, something to touch on right after talking about the thickness of this phone, because it's the main reason they've made this device much bigger. The actual battery size is 18% bigger than the iPhone 12 and about 25% bigger than my previous iPhone 11. And yes, you can feel that in the weight of this phone, and I'll tell you where else you can feel it. In that general 2-day battery life, the battery life on this phone is insane. For a general person who's just doing a little bit of web browsing every now and again, this phone will last you for 2 days. I guarantee it. I average around 6 hours screen on time every day, which I find absolutely crazy. Don't talk to me about it. But this phone just absolutely kills it. Like I've said, it's a 2-day phone. And isn't that just insane that we have an iPhone now that can last 2 days? Now, next on the list to do today was Jed and I were going to go and get some shots of my Defender, because we are working on my Defender 2020 review, a tech review of that car, and I thought to myself, why not take the 13 Pro Max along and get some shots of the car with this phone specifically, and then that way I can show those shots to you and you can just judge for yourself as to what you think of the quality of these. Because I can sit here all day and say that they shoot great photos, but then if you don't agree with that, then what's the point? So the following little cinematic was all shot out of this phone. The one major place that I saw the main upgrades to the camera system on this phone was in that ultra-wide lens. So before, for whatever reason, the ultra-wide lens never were able to let a lot of light in, which resulted in quite grainy shots, especially when it got to low light or nighttime. This sensor in this phone lets in so much more light that the ultra-wide camera is now usable in places where it just previously wasn't, which for me is great because I am all for that ultra-wide look. I think it looks really, really cool when you can get stylistic with it. The natural bokeh that comes out the main shooter of this camera is just insane. And I'm not talking about the cinematic mode here or any depth effects, I'm talking about the actual bokeh that comes from these cameras. Now, you have to just imagine this right now, that lenses from a big camera are huge and that's how they can get incredible bokeh, whereas we don't have that much space to work with inside of these phones. So the fact that we're getting this sort of level bokeh from these cameras that are literally in this phone that is this thin is really, really impressive. The only other upgrade is the fact that the telephoto lens is 3 times instead of 2.5. However, I've never really been a fan of the telephoto lens. When I've tried to use it on this in my day-to-day life, not for taking stuff for this review, I found that 3 times is actually a little bit too much. The switching between the 3 lenses is great and seamless. The best way I'd describe it is Apple-like. The other new thing with the camera system is in obviously the computational stuff. Now this is, I think, Apple's future, because we're talking about hardware here and we can't make these things any bigger, really, right? So the best thing for Apple to do is to do it all computationally, do it all in the software. So they now have what's called photographic styles, which allows you to go in and actually bake in a color preset into all of your photos. So this isn't just like a filter that goes on top of the original photo. This is actually built into the metadata of the photos that you're taking. So you can have all your photos look a specific way if you want. And to be honest, completely all for it. Now, cinematic mode is something that has touched a few nerves with me because a lot of the Apple promo has been saying it's basically a Hollywood rig in your pocket. Let me tell you, it's not a Hollywood rig in your pocket. It's iffy at best. I would never really use this thing for shooting any of my videos like this. I'd always get my bigger camera out and blur the background out with a bigger lens because I can. However, that doesn't mean that this cinematic mode isn't good for videos viewed on a smaller screen or viewed on a smartphone type screen or for social media. For example, I have a lot of friends in the film industry, especially my friend Jimmy, who just picked up this phone, and he's blown away with the cinematic mode on this. Now, he wouldn't use it for any of his big shoots, he'd use his main cameras because this isn't a Hollywood replacement thing that goes in your pocket like Apple say. But what it is a really cool attempt at blurring out the background for things when you're viewing it on social media, i.e. viewing it on a smaller screen like on your phone. Still no manual control. You can't control your f-stop or your ISO or your shutter speed on the stock camera app. You will have to use a third-party app for that, which is a shame. I wish they were going to introduce that into this cinematic mode, which is what I was hoping that cinematic mode was going to be. Instead, all we get is a blurred background, and one thing to add is you can change the blur or the focus after the fact if you want. It's all a bit of a gimmick. Wouldn't really use it except for social media. And that's my thoughts on that. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. And I suppose at this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, Alex, are you going to tell us if we should buy this thing or not? And see, here's the thing. It's very, very expensive, but it's also very, very good in ways that I didn't even expect. For example, like I mentioned right at the start of the video, the speaker system. Something that people always brush over on these phone reviews. It's insane. The speakers in this phone, I don't know how they do it. But what I'm saying is phones are already good enough. It's honestly hard to recommend a new device like this iPhone 13 Pro Max unless you've got like a 4, maybe 5-year-old phone that's really battered and doesn't work anymore. Then yes, this is going to be a great upgrade. But let's say you've still got an iPhone 11 from 2 or 3 years ago kicking around and the screen's not smashed and it still works. You don't need this phone. It's not going to benefit your life in any way. Yes, it would be nice to have, especially if you're a tech nerd and you want all of the cool things that this phone offers, like the 120Hz, but it's not going to improve your life in any way, shape or form. These phones have reached hardware limitations. They ain't gonna get much bigger, and to get better, they need to get bigger, and that isn't gonna happen. So I think Apple's route from here on out is software. So if you wanna bank on that, this is a great device to get. It's gonna run Apple software for 4 or 5 years at least, and it's gonna do it well. It's got great battery life, and to be honest guys, I absolutely love this phone. But like I've said, it's super expensive, so now I've put everything on the table for you. The ball's in your court. Guys, my name's been Alex, this has been TechFlow, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.